Chapter 42-39. Although he didn't get the secret of the grey fog from the Blood Hell Marshal's soul memory. But Ji Tianqing wasn't disappointed. Anyway, he had investigated for so long and roughly knew what was going on with the grey fog. As for the specific situation, he would naturally go to the depths of the void in the future and investigate it himself. The most important thing now was to conquer the Reincarnation Island and control the entire God realm. At the same time, more than 200 assassins of the Hidden Death Group who escaped the pursuit sent back the news that the Blood Hell Marshal's army was ambushed and the situation seemed to be bad. Although they didn't enter the ancient Pine Grotto heaven and didn't know the specific situation. But they lost contact with the Blood Hell Marshal and the many god generals and were pursued by the Pine Crane clan. This was enough to prove that the Blood Hell Marshal had been defeated, and that the 18,000 soldiers were likely to have perished. In the Yudu city, Commander Mingi, many god king powerhouses, and the 18 domain lords had been patiently waiting for the news. Although everyone was very confident in the Blood Hell Marshal and believed that he would win this battle. But in everyone's heart, there was a trace of speculation about Kenshin, so they were still a little nervous. If they didn't get the exact news of the Blood Hell Marshal's victory, they couldn't really be at ease. Finally, the assassins of the Hidden Death Group sent back the news. The god generals and the leader of the Hidden Death Group who received the Jade Scroll didn't even have time to check the content of the message before sending it to Commander Mingi. Commander Mingi took the Jade Scroll with anticipation, but when he saw the content of the report in the Jade Scroll, he was stunned on the spot. Immediately, the smile on his face stiffened and gradually became cold, and his body burst out with towering anger and murderous intent. This is impossible. The Grand Marshal personally led the army, and he has always been cautious. How could he be ambushed and defeated? In a rage, Commander Mingi smashed the communication Jade Scroll with a slap. He was so angry that his face turned black and his body was trembling. The leader of the Hidden Death Group and several god generals were also dumbfounded. They all widened their eyes in horror and couldn't believe the news. Commander Dark River had smashed the transmission slip, but the transmission slip had been shattered. But more than 200 assassins of the Hidden Death Group scattered and fled, and many of them sent back messages to report the battle situation. As a result, in the next hour, the leader of the Hidden Death Group received dozens of communication Jade Scrolls. The contents of each Jade slip were roughly the same. At the same time, Nangong Nihuang, Nangong Ao, and the others also replied to Ji Tianqing and reported the progress of their mission. A few days ago, not long after the battle ended, Ji Tianqing gave them an order and assigned them a mission. Ji Tianqing's next plan was to lead an army of more than 10,000 people from the 5 ancient clans to conquer the 18 regions one by one before finally attacking Reincarnation Island. However, before that, he had to make the situation on Reincarnation Island more chaotic. At the same time, he had to put some pressure on the 18 domain lords stationed in Yudu. He asked Nangong Nihuang, Nangong Ao, Zhan Wudi, Lan Kai, and Yuchi Pe to use disguise techniques to sneak into the secret places of the various regions and use concealment and assassination methods to create chaos. If they could sneak into the domain lord's manor and assassinate some of the guards, that would be the best. In short, he had to make the various regions chaotic. The 18 domain lords stationed in Yudu would definitely be worried when they learned that their territories were in trouble. Perhaps, they would not dare to leave Yudu because of Commander Mingi's authority and orders. However, there would definitely be animosity and conflict between them and Commander Mingi. In short, Ji Tianqing gave this mission to the 5 young god kings and let them do whatever they wanted. In the past 2 days, he received replies from Nangong Ao and the others, and the results were surprisingly good. The 5 young god kings used various methods to create chaos in various regions. They even killed over a dozen generals and commanders. Nangong Ao was the boldest. He even sneaked into the domain lord's manor of a certain region and pretended to be the captain of the guards. Not only did he kill 2 generals, but he also destroyed the treasury of the Domain Lord's manor, causing chaos in the entire Domain Lord's manor. Thousands of guards who stayed behind to guard the manor attacked each other. It was very lively. In this way, several regions were in chaos. After the news spread, it quickly reached Yuda's city. Chapter 42-41. The outstanding performance of the 5 young divine kings won Ji Tianqing's affirmation and praise. They enjoyed it very much and continued to wreak havoc in other regions as if they were tireless. Especially Nangong Ao, who was arrogant, bold, meticulous, and crazy. He used all kinds of ingenious ideas and methods to wreak havoc in other domain chiefs' mansions. A few days later, riots broke out in a few more regions. 2 domain chiefs' mansions had internal strife. Just like that, half of Reincarnation Island became a mess. After the news spread, the people were also talking about it or gloating. They didn't know that someone was deliberately sabotaging. They only thought that the soldiers guarding the various domain chiefs' mansions were afraid of the Kenshin's authority and had differences and conflicts with each other. After the news spread to Yuda's city, several domain chiefs' mansions were very anxious. Although their families and the elite forces under them were all in Yuda's city, they were still in Yuda's city. But those regions were their territories, and the domain chiefs' mansions were their homes. The guards, soldiers, and servants guarding the domain chiefs' mansions were also their most reliable servants. They were not abandoned. When they heard that the backyard was on fire, and the guards and servants even attacked and fought each other, the domain chief's eyes turned red with anxiety. They sent message jade slips one after another, questioning the soldiers guarding the domain chief's mansions remotely about what had happened. However, the guards and soldiers were divided into several factions. They each had their own version of the story, doubted and attacked each other. It was a mess, and no one could explain it clearly. Even when the domain chief ordered them to reconcile and guard the domain chief's mansions, no one obeyed him. In fact, 2 of the guards and soldiers left behind to guard the domain chief's mansions had even defected. The domain chief's remote command and mediation were useless. They were so anxious that they had no choice but to go to Commander Mingi. They wanted to ask Commander Mingi to allow them to return to the domain chief's mansions and settle the internal strife in person. However, the result was no surprise that they were rejected. They were even scolded by Commander Mingi. Commander Mingi saw it clearly. He said that the 5 ancient clans deliberately sent people to cause trouble to force them to return to their respective territories. If they couldn't hold back and return to their respective domain chiefs' mansions, they would definitely be killed by the 5 ancient clans. Commander Mingi was right. This was indeed part of Ji Tianqing's plan. If any domain chief left Yudu and rushed back to his domain chief's mansions, Ji Tianqing would definitely rush over and subdue him. Commander Mingi also wanted to scare the domain chief, so he said subdue him instead of kill. As expected, those territorial lords were intimidated. Since it was more important to save their own lives, they naturally did not dare to return to the territorial lord's manor. However, they were unwilling to accept this and asked Commander Mingi, what should they do? Were they supposed to watch the guards and soldiers who stayed behind to guard the domain chief's manor fight among themselves, then betray and kill each other? If that was the case, the entire domain chief's manor would be in chaos. Wouldn't it collapse on its own? Commander Mingi did not answer the question directly. Instead, he avoided the topic and patiently tried to enlighten the domain masters. In short, what he wanted to express was that he wanted the few domain lords to guard Yuda's city with peace of mind and prioritize Yuda's city. As for their domain chief's manor and territories, they could only give up on them for the time being. After all, Yuda's city had to be protected. As long as they won, the territories of the various region lords would still be there. If Yuda's city fell and they were defeated, all 18 regions would fall. There was no chance for them to survive. The domain lords weren't fools. They quickly figured out the logic and understood Commander Mingi's intentions. Even though they felt uncomfortable, there was nothing they could do. They could only obey Commander Mingi's orders and stay in Yudu City obediently. As for the chaos in their own territories and the domain chief's manor, they were powerless to stop it and could only let it happen. In the blink of an eye, another 10 days passed. 20 days had passed since the Blood Prison Marshal and his army of 20,000 had been wiped out. The Reincarnation Island was still bustling with noise and excitement. Hundreds of millions of people were still discussing all kinds of news. Nangong Nihuang, Nangong Ao, and the others were still running around the various domains, trying their best to cause chaos and destruction, trying to make the 18 domains fall into chaos. The patriarchs and elders of the 4 ancient clans also brought their carefully selected elite disciples to gather at ancient Pine Grotto Heaven. The 4 patriarchs had contacted each other and discussed in private. The number of disciples that each patriarch would select was around 2,500. The total number of disciples of the 4 ancient clans was exactly 10,000. By doing this, they could show the 4 ancient clans support for the Kenshin and their determination to follow the Kenshin into battle. They could also leave thousands of clansmen behind to have enough strength to protect the grotto mansions and homes of the various clans. After all, after the 4 patriarchs left with their elite forces, the grotto mansions of the 4 ancient clans were closed one after another. The clansmen who stayed behind no longer went in and out. Relying on the defensive formation of the Grotto Heaven, they were not afraid of being invaded. Unless Commander Mingi led an army to attack, no one could break through. Early in the morning, the patriarchs and elders of the 5 ancient clans gathered in the conference hall. Ji Tianqing sat on the throne at the head of the table and listened to the reports of various intelligence. He was quite satisfied with the efficiency and determination of the 4 ancient clans. After reporting the news, the patriarchs of the 4 ancient clans all asked Ji Tianqing to go to war. They couldn't wait to participate in the battle and make a name for themselves. Therefore, Ji Tianqing said to everyone, "The time is ripe. Our military strength is sufficient, and the public opinion and reputation of the people have also reached the peak. Now is the time when our rebel alliance's reputation is at its peak. Of course, it is the best time to go to war. Patriarch Pine Crane, choose 1,000 disciples today and prepare to follow the army." Since the 4 ancient clans had sent out 2,500 people, the Pine Crane race naturally had to send out the same number of people. However, there were still about 1,500 captives who had pledged loyalty to Ji Tianqing. After recuperating, they had recovered more than half of their combat strength. Therefore, the Pine Crane race only needed to send out 1,000 disciples. Patriarch Pine Crane also understood that this was the Kenshin taking care of the Pine Crane race. He was very grateful and hurriedly bowed to accept the order. Then, Ji Tianqing said to everyone, "The number of soldiers that can be mobilized under our alliance will reach 12,500 people. It is more than enough to conquer the various domains. After all, the domain lords and elite forces of the 18 domains have already gathered in Yuda City. Therefore, I have decided to split into 2 groups and conquer the 18 domains as quickly as possible. Clear out all the domain lord manors, disband the forces under the domain lords, and seal the 18 domain lord manors." Considering that the 18 domain lords were in Yuda City and the various domain lord manors were leaderless and could not be conquered, Ji Tianqing gave this order. However, the patriarchs were all tempted. Someone could not help but suggest, "Lord Kenshin, the 18 domain lords will die sooner or later. Why don't we conquer the various domains, occupy the domain lord manors, and choose a new domain lord?" Bookhouse Reading Website. Chapter 42-42. Everyone was well aware of the intentions of those few patriarchs. They wanted to take advantage of this opportunity to divide the 18 districts of the Reincarnation Island and take control of them. After all, there were only 5 of them under the command of the Kenshin. The new domain lord would definitely be chosen from among them. Other than this, there was no better choice. The chiefs were looking forward to it, thinking that they would get what they wanted. Unexpectedly, Ji Tianqing decisively rejected this proposal. There are still tens of thousands of soldiers guarding the Yuda city. We only have 12,500 people, which is already pitifully small. If we occupy the 18 district masters' manors, we will definitely spread out more power. At that time, I will take a few thousand people to attack the Yuda city. Do you want me to let a few thousand soldiers face tens of thousands of enemies? The war has just begun, and the outcome is still unknown. Please put away your little thoughts. Ji Tianqing didn't give any face to the patriarchs and directly exposed their thoughts. Immediately, the patriarchs' faces were filled with awkwardness as they retreated with embarrassed smiles. Next, Ji Tianqing announced the decision to divide the troops. He would personally lead an army to surround the 9 regions around Yuda's city, conquering and clearing them one by one. This army was composed of the Hidden Dragon tribe of the Yinlong domain and the Kuei tribe of the Kuei Mountain domain, totaling 5,000 people. The other army was led by Pine Crane tribe, Quicksand tribe, and Fong tribe. The 7,500 soldiers were led by Pine Crane tribe, Quicksand tribe, and Fong tribe. Although there was a difference in numbers between the two armies, the Hidden Dragon tribe and Kuei tribe agreed happily to follow Ji Tianqing. Most importantly, the chiefs of the Hidden Dragon tribe and Kuei tribe were 2 troublemakers. One was straightforward and hot-tempered, while the other was more scheming and scheming. Ji Tianqing had to lead them personally to ensure that there would be no accidents. The Pine Crane clan's loyalty to him was obvious to all. Quicksand tribe and Fong tribe were also more obedient and rarely provoked trouble. It was also easier to let the disciples of these 2 tribes follow the Pine Crane tribe and accept the command of Pine Crane tribe. The meeting ended like this. Ji Tianqing waved his hand to dismiss everyone and ordered them to set out in 8 hours. In the evening, the sun was setting in the west. The 12,500 soldiers of the 5 clans rode on 5 different divine ships and sailed out of ancient Pine Grotto in a grandiose manner. White Dragon steered the god-slaying battleship, carrying Ji Tianqing, and led the battleships of the Hidden Dragon clan and the Kuei clan towards the north at lightning speed. Patriarch Song He led the disciples of the Quicksand clan and the Fong clan in a fleet of 3 divine warships and flew toward the southwest. Ji Tianqing's goal and mission was to subdue the 9 regions in the inner circle with Yuda's city as the center. The goal of the Pine Crane clan, Quicksand clan and Fong clan was to conquer the 9 territories in the outer circle. In comparison, subduing the 9 regions in the outer circle would take more time and travel. As for the 9 regions in the inner circle, they had to endure even more dangers. They could be ambushed by the Nether River commander at any time. Several hours later, the fleet led by Patriarch Song He arrived at their first target, the domain chief's manor in the Cypress Pine region. For 1,000 years, Patriarch Song He was known as a stubborn old man who refused to yield to the Nether River commander. The domain chief of the Cypress Pine region was the lackey and loyal servant of the Nether River commander. Therefore, the relationship between the Pine Crane clan and the Cypress Pine region commander was very strained. There were often conflicts and disputes. Countless times, the disciples of the Pine Crane clan had dreamed of trampling the domain chief's manor and killing the Cypress Pine region commander. Now, their wish had finally come true. Although they couldn't kill the Cypress Pine region commander for the time being, they could still trample the domain chief's manor. The 3 divine warships arrived outside the Cypress Pine region commander's manor and arranged themselves in an attack formation in the sky. The domain chief's manor was in a grotto, and the entrance was guarded all year round. However, the domain chief's manor was closed after the Cypress Pine region commander rushed to Yudu with his elite forces. Naturally, the guards guarding the entrance of the domain master's mansion also withdrew into the cave. Seeing that the defense formation of the domain chief's manor was activated and the entrance was closed, there were no guards around. Patriarch Song He decisively ordered the attack. If the enemy hid in the domain chief's manor and didn't show up, he would break the formation by force and attack the domain chief's manor. This scene was very similar to when the Blood Prison Marshal led the army to attack the ancient Pine Grotto. However, the Pine Crane clan had the help of the Kenshin. In the end, the Blood Prison Marshal was defeated and died with regret. However, there were no strong practitioners in the Cypress Pine region commander's manor. There were only more than 3,000 guards and soldiers, and more than 5,000 servants and odd-job workers. The 7,500 disciples of the Pine Crane clan, the Quicksand clan, and the Fong clan formed 3 battle formations and attacked continuously for 2 days. The 3 warships also joined the battle and spent billions of resources to bombard the entrance of the grotto. Even though the guards and soldiers who stayed behind to guard the domain chief's manor desperately resisted and defended with all their might. However, after 2 days, the defense formation of the grotto was still breached. Patriarch Song He led more than 7,000 soldiers into the domain chief's manor with murderous intent and started a massacre. The 3,000 guards and soldiers guarding the domain chief's manor resisted with all their might for 4 hours before they were utterly defeated. More than half of them were killed or injured. The survivors surrendered one after another, and thousands of servants and odd-job workers fled in panic. Patriarch Song He followed Ji Tianqing's decree and orders and did not kill the surrendered guards and servants. He took out a jade slip in front of everyone and showed the captives a simple pledge of surrender, forcing them to read it out loud. The pledge was only a little more than 100 words. The general idea was that the captives would no longer fight against the Kenshin and the forces under their command. They would immediately leave the domain chief's manor and stop helping the tyrants. If the captives could abide by the pledge, they would be safe. However, if they dared to do anything that endangered the Kenshin or disobeyed the Kenshin's decree, they would be punished by the heavens and die. The heavenly oath was very simple and clear. It was not harsh. Most importantly, the oath did not require the captives to become Kenshin soldiers and go to the battlefield to kill the enemy. Therefore, more than 1,000 guards and soldiers, and more than 5,000 servants and odd-job workers all recited the heavenly oath. After the pledge was made, Patriarch Song He dismissed the soldiers and servants and ordered them to go their separate ways. They were not to fight against the Kenshin anymore. Those guards, soldiers, and servants had barely survived the ordeal. Naturally, they hurriedly fled from the domain chief's manor and went back to their own homes to look for their mothers. No one risked being struck by the heavenly lightning and rushed to Yudu city to look for their domain chief. They only hoped to be as far away from the disaster as possible so that they would not be implicated. Half a day later, the Pine Cypress domain chief's manor was emptied. All the wealth and resources were confiscated. Patriarch Song He then led the soldiers to seal the entrance of the grotto heaven with array formation skills. After that, he led the fleet to the next area. Chapter 42-43. The army led by Patriarch Pine Crane had a smooth journey, and they advanced triumphantly. Ji Tianqing led the Hidden Dragon tribe and the Kuei tribe to their first target. The domain chief's manor was also closed. 4,000 guards, 5,000 servants, and odd-job workers stayed in the manor, living in fear every day. It only took Ji Tianqing 15 minutes to break through the domain chief's mansion's defensive formation. Then, it took him another 2 hours to break the king-level upper-grade formation, creating a huge gap in it. Even though the guards in the manor noticed something was wrong and came to stop them in time, they couldn't do anything. However, they were unable to stop the 5,000-strong army that was brimming with killing intent. As soon as they came face to face, they were beaten to a pulp and fled in all directions. In the end, the remaining guards, servants, and odd-job workers were surrounded by Ji Tianqing and his army. Ji Tianqing didn't hide anymore. He showed up in the open, frightening the guards and servants. Everyone was terrified and obediently recited a simplified version of the heavenly Tao oath. Since the news of Kenshin's arrival on Reincarnation Island had spread, Ji Tianqing had nothing to worry about. The news of the 4 ancient clans gathering their disciples and rushing to ancient Pine Cave from all directions had spread to Yudu. It was proven that the four ancient clans hadn't participated in the previous two battles, and it was all thanks to the Pine Crane tribe. Since the Pine Crane tribe couldn't have done it, the only answer was Kenshin had taken action. The people on Reincarnation Island believed that Kenshin had come. Commander Mingi and his soldiers also had enough evidence to prove that Kenshin had taken action. Since the truth was out, Ji Tianqing didn't have to hide his whereabouts anymore. What he needed to do was to conquer the 18 districts as soon as possible and then attack Yuda City. Soon, the guards and servants who had recited the Heavenly Tao Oath were chased out of the manor. After the army collected the spoils of war, Ji Tianqing cast a spell and sealed the entrance of the manor. After the first target was taken care of, Ji Tianqing led the army to the next district. In just 2 days, the news spread all over the Reincarnation Island. Everyone knew that the 5 ancient clans were loyal to the Kenshin and formed the rebel alliance. There were more than 12,000 soldiers in total. These soldiers were divided into 2 groups and were conquering various regions. So far, 2 of the domain chief's mansions had been sealed. The guards and servants guarding the domain chief's manor were all driven out and dismissed. After the news spread, millions of people cheered in joy, extremely excited and moved. They were excited not only because the news of Kenshin's arrival on Reincarnation Island was confirmed. More importantly, the Sword God had finally led his troops into battle and began to subdue the various regions. Even though the 18 Zone Lords were hiding in Yuda City and Kenshin was temporarily unable to subdue them, he couldn't order them to restore the freedom of the people. But the people knew that they were not far from freedom and liberation. The 18 Zone Lords were not there, and the defense of the domain chief's manor was also very weak. It was impossible for them to resist the army under Kenshin. The commoners were looking forward to it. In at most 2 months, Sword God would be able to lead his army to attack Yuda City. On the other side, Commander Mingi and many soldiers in Yuda City also received the news. Commander Mingi was, of course, full of anger, anxiety, and worry. The morale of the tens of thousands of soldiers was even lower, and they were quite flustered. Countless people were discussing this matter, and they were somewhat at a loss. This time, no matter how strict Commander Mingi's orders were, the soldiers were not allowed to talk or run away, but it was useless. Not only were the ordinary soldiers on tenterhooks, but many of the generals were also burning with anxiety. The entire Yudu city was filled with a heavy, oppressive, and desperate atmosphere. It seemed that the morale would collapse and chaos would occur even before the arrival of the Kenshin army. Time passed day after day. One district after another was conquered by the 2 armies of the Rebel Alliance. The Rebel Alliance also cleared the guards and servants of the various domain chiefs' manors, and then sealed the entrances and exits. As for the guards and servants of the domain chief's manor who were dismissed, they were forced to swear an oath to the Heavenly Tao that they would not fight against the Rebel Alliance again, let alone endanger the interests of the Kenshin. Although there were very few guards and servants who were very loyal to their masters. After being chased out of the domain chief's manor, they rushed to Yudu to seek refuge with their masters or inform them. However, without exception, these people were all reduced to ashes by the divine lightning that descended from the sky. Not even dregs were left. More than 20 examples in a row repeatedly proved the existence of the oath to the Heavenly Tao, and the results were very terrifying. As a result, those guards and servants who had been dismissed no longer dared to violate their oaths. Of course, many people discovered that they would not violate the heavenly punishment if they revealed the news of the domain chief's manor being attacked and sealed, and spread the name and power of the Kenshin among the people. Therefore, the news of the various domain chiefs' manors falling one after another continued to spread. The name of the Kenshin, its powerful strength, and methods were also spread more and more loudly. A month had passed. The army led by Ji Tianqing successively conquered 7 regions. Although the army led by him had been circling around Yudu, they had not encountered any powerful interceptions or ambushes. Commander Mingi and his tens of thousands of soldiers were determined to defend Yudu to the death and did not take the initiative to attack at all. The army led by Patriarch Song He successively conquered 6 regions. More than half of Reincarnation Island was controlled by the rebel alliance. The domain chiefs' manors of the 13 regions were cleared. Many emperors of the empires were trembling in fear, afraid that they would be wiped out by the rebel alliance's army. Fortunately, the 2 armies of the rebel alliance only cleared and sealed the various domain chiefs' manors and did not harm the innocent. The emperors and people of the empires were only in awe of the Kenshin. They did not fear or hate them. They also had the mentality of a bystander, looking forward to what would happen next. 40 days later, the army led by Ji Tianqing conquered and sealed the domain chiefs' manors of 2 more regions, being the first to complete the mission. 50 days later, the army led by Patriarch Song He also completed the mission. So far, the 18 regions of Reincarnation Island had all been conquered by the Rebel Alliance. Everyone knew that the Rebel Alliance's army was about to encircle and attack Yuda City. The final battle was coming, and the outcome would soon be decided. Would Kenshin flatten Yudu and take control of the entire Reincarnation Island? Or would Mingi lead a desperate counterattack, turn defeat into victory, and regain the hegemony of the Reincarnation Island? Of course, countless people and forces did not know that the incarnation of the god of the underworld had long been destroyed by Ji Tianqing in the void. Many people were still worried about Kenshin, afraid that the incarnation of the god of the underworld would come back to support Commander Mingi. At that time, if Kenshin could not defeat the incarnation of the god of the underworld, all his efforts would be in vain. Bookhouse Reading Website. Chapter 42-44. Ji Tianqing led the Hidden Dragon tribe and the Kuei tribe to the south gate of Yuda City after sealing the 9 regions in the inner circle. However, the 3 divine warships stopped 200,000 miles away from the southern city gate, resting and waiting quietly. Yuda City wasn't big, but it was surrounded by the river of black water. It was also surrounded by poisonous fog. Over the past half a year, Commander Mingi and the Blood Hell Marshal had thought of all sorts of ways to strengthen the defenses of Yuda City. On top of the Black River and poisonous fog, Commander Mingi had also mobilized tens of thousands of soldiers to set up 6 layers of formations and thousands of traps outside the city. The city walls of Yuda City, which were 1,000 feet tall, had also closed all the entrances and exits. They were heavily guarded, and there was a sentry every 5 and 10 steps. The city protecting formation and the 6 layers of heaven and earth formation outside the city were constantly in operation, and huge amounts of cultivation resources were expended every day. However, Commander Mingi had been in charge of Reincarnation Island for close to 1,000 years, and he had plundered countless cultivation resources. No matter how much energy was expended to maintain the defenses of Yuda City, the cultivation resources stored in the treasury were enough to last for more than 100 years. When the news of the Domain Lord Manor of the 18 regions being attacked and sealed by the Rebel Alliance reached Yuda City, Commander Mingi knew that the time to decide his fate had arrived. He gathered the 18 Domain Lords, Generals, and God Kings for a meeting in the middle of the night. He told everyone to be on their guard and be prepared for battle. Even though the Domain Lords, Generals, and God Kings were terrified, and the morale of the tens of thousands of soldiers was low. However, they knew that the Kenshin and the Rebel Alliance wouldn't let them off just because of their passive attitude. When the Kenshin led the Rebel Alliance to attack Yuda City, they would be the first to be killed. Therefore, the Domain Lords, Generals, and God Kings pulled themselves together and showed their most resolute determination to command the soldiers to resist to the end. 2 hours later, Commander Mingi's decree was passed to the army, and tens of thousands of soldiers knew about it. No matter how lazy and passive the 50,000 soldiers were, they had to pull themselves together and be on full alert in order to protect their lives. The tens of thousands of soldiers were tense, and they unleashed the defenses of Yuda City to the extreme. However, after waiting for 2 whole days, there was still no sign of the Kenshin and Rebel Alliance's army. They immediately felt a strong sense of defeat. For 2 consecutive days, their nerves were stretched taut and they were highly focused. This caused the soldiers to feel mentally exhausted. Chapter 42-45. The situation on Reincarnation Island was extremely tense, and Yuta City was the center of attention. Patriarch Song He, who had completed his mission, didn't have time to rest. He immediately led his army and rushed to Yuta City. He didn't care about the rumors in the outside world or the discussions of the people and factions. He only knew that Lord Kenshin had stopped outside Yuta City with his army to wait for him to meet up with them. If the army he led was a day late to Yuta City, it could affect Lord Kenshin's plan. Therefore, the fleet formed by the 3 divine warships rushed to Yuta City at their fastest speed. Along the way, there were naturally large numbers of scouts and spies. They were the eyes that Commander Mingi had left in the various regions of Reincarnation Island. Those scouts and spies might not be very strong, but their observation skills and intelligence gathering abilities were very outstanding. When Commander Mingi gathered the soldiers back to defend Yudu, he didn't recall those scouts and spies. He left them in the various regions so that they could gather intelligence. Therefore, when the scouts and spies in the various regions discovered Patriarch Song He's tracks, they hurriedly reported to Commander Mingi. When Commander Mingi knew the tracks of Patriarch Song He and the 7,500 soldiers, he estimated how long it would take for them to reach Yuta City. Everyone knew that after these 7,500 soldiers met up with Kenshin, Kenshin would definitely attack Yuta City. In other words, when Patriarch Song He's army reached Yuta City, the decisive battle would begin. 5 days. At most, 5 days later, the 2 armies of the Rebel Alliance would meet up and attack Yuta City. This was the result of Commander Mingi's estimation. He gathered the 18 region lords, the numerous generals, and the divine kings and told them the answer. At the same time, he mobilized the strong practitioners before the battle again. Everyone still had 5 days left to rest and recuperate and conserve their energy. 5 days later, it would be the time to fight with their lives to protect Yuta City. If they won, he would reward all the soldiers with the most generous rewards. If they were defeated, he would face death along with all the other soldiers. The numerous divine kings felt Commander Mingi's determination and were touched. They all expressed their determination and attitude, swearing to live and die with Yuta City. General Mingi and the soldiers thought that they still had 5 days to catch their breath and make all the necessary preparations. But in reality, Ji Tianqing still decided to take the risk and sneak into Yuta City after serious consideration and analysis. When he made this decision, the Hidden Dragon clan leader and the Kuei clan leader were beside him. The 2 patriarchs thought that this decision was too risky and tried to dissuade Ji Tianqing. The 2 patriarchs bowed at the same time to express their determination to Ji Tianqing. Their tone was very impassioned. Ji Tianqing smiled and said, "I will give you 15 minutes to prepare. After you are done, gather here again. Of course, this matter must be kept a secret, and no 4th person must know about it." The 2 patriarchs were stunned, and the Hidden Dragon chief subconsciously asked, "Lord Kenshin, are we going to leave quietly without even informing the elders? In that case, if we leave for a few days, will there be any problems if they stay here?" Ji Tianqing waved his hand and said, "I have already given the order for all the soldiers to rest in the divine ship and conserve their energy. Patriarch Song He's army will only arrive in 5 days to meet up with us. In these 5 days, there won't be any problems if they stay here. 5 days is enough for us to complete the mission." After hearing his explanation, the 2 patriarchs no longer had any worries and hurriedly left the study. 15 minutes later, the 2 patriarchs finished their preparations and came to the study to gather with Ji Tianqing. After that, the 3 of them quietly left the divine ship and flew toward Yuta City under the cover of the night sky. If they wanted to enter Yuta City, they would first have to cross the poisonous fog that was 5,000 miles wide and then cross the Black Water River that was 50 miles wide before they could reach the city walls. The defenses near the south city gate of Yuda city were very strong and heavily guarded. Since Ji Tianqing was going to assassinate Commander Styx, he naturally wouldn't choose the south city gate as his breakthrough point. He brought the two patriarchs and hurried toward the northwest. He chose an area with weaker defenses as his breakthrough point. Not long later, the three of them arrived at the poisonous fog area. The two patriarchs were still wary of the poisonous fog's power and were thinking about how to break it. Unexpectedly, Ji Tianqing put them into the internal space of the primordial chaos bell and barged straight into the poisonous fog. Of course, Ji Tianqing did not care about these things. Those soldiers were all at the Divine Lord realm. Only some captains and commanders were Divine King realm powerhouses. Over a month ago, he had entered Yudu and investigated the situation of the defenses. After he had killed Blood Hell Marshal and refined his memories, he had a clearer understanding of the defenses of Yuda city. At this moment, after some observation, he discovered the problem. As I expected, after Blood Hell Marshal was killed, Commander Mingi made a large-scale adjustment to the defenses of Yuda city. Originally, in his memory, this section of the city wall in front of him was the weakest point of the defense. However, after Commander Mingi adjusted the defenses, this place was no longer weak. Even so, Ji Tianqing did not plan on changing locations. He began to observe the Great City Barrier Formation. After using an hour to clearly see the structure of the formation, he pondered for another hour to deduce a way to crack it. Next, it was time to test his attainments in the formation path and his abilities. Not only did he have to cast spells to crack the Great City Barrier Formation, but he also had to silently chisel out a gap without alerting the guards on the city wall. It was not difficult to crack the formation, but to use god power and divine arts to crack the formation without alerting the guards nearby was harder than ascending to the heavens. In the eyes of the Hidden Dragon clan and the Kuei clan, this was almost an impossible task. Not to mention the Divine Lord guards on the city wall, with Kenshin's abilities and methods, he should be able to hide it. However, no matter how useless the Divine King powerhouses and the guards were, it was impossible for them not to sense the god power fluctuations of someone casting spells. However, when Ji Tianqing began to cast spells to crack the Great City Barrier Formation, the two clan leaders who were observing the battle in the world inside the bell were dumbfounded. This was because Ji Tianqing was able to multitask. He could cast spells to crack the Great City Barrier Formation while also casting spells to conceal the god power's aura. Moreover, his control over his god power was extremely precise and could be said to be extremely ingenious. Strands of god power were continuously injected into the Great City Barrier Formation, silently changing the structure of the formation and breaking down the structure of the formation. However, not a single strand of extra power leaked out. As for the extremely weak and undetectable god power fluctuations, they were completely concealed by his divine arts and secret techniques. Not only did the guards on the city wall not notice anything unusual, even the two clan leaders could not sense the god power fluctuations. At this moment, the two clan leaders had a further understanding of Kenshin's abilities and methods. They were even more shocked and impressed. Unknowingly, 12 hours had passed. Under normal circumstances, Ji Tianqing would only need 4 hours to crack the Great City Barrier Formation, but he had finally opened a gap. The key was that the Great City Barrier Formation had a fist-sized gap, but there was nothing unusual about the formation. It was still operating quietly and steadily. The guards on the city wall naturally did not notice anything unusual. Swish! Ji Tianqing shrunk his body and quickly passed through the gap like a speck of dust. He entered the Great City Barrier Formation. Then, this speck of dust silently flew over the city wall and into the city. During the entire process, the guards on the city wall were like stone statues. They did not react at all. The two clan leaders in the world inside the bell witnessed the entire process clearly. Other than shock, there was only reverence in their hearts. Ji Tianqing had long been familiar with the topography and structure of Yuda city. He returned to his normal form and remained invisible. He silently flew over half of the city and arrived outside the Netherworld Divine Palace. Yudu's city had a radius of a few hundred miles, and the Netherworld Divine Palace was a majestic group of palaces that occupied a radius of a few dozen miles. It was almost a city within a city. The defenses of this inner city were even tighter, and the number of guards had also doubled. The most troublesome thing was that this inner city also had a great city barrier formation. Moreover, this great city barrier formation was personally set up by the god of the underworld 1,000 years ago. It was a genuine supreme-grade king barrier formation. Ji Tianqing had no choice but to find a secluded place where the guards were relatively weak and repeat his previous actions. He observed the great city barrier formation and looked for a way to crack it. Then, he multitasked again. As he tried to crack the great city barrier formation, he used a secret technique to conceal his divine power fluctuations. This time, the difficulty of cracking the great city barrier formation was even higher. Ji Tianqing's mental energy was also more exhausted. Of course, it would also take a longer time to crack the great city barrier formation. He used an entire day to successfully crack the great city barrier formation without alerting anyone. Finally, he managed to sneak into the Netherworld Divine Palace in the middle of the night. Chapter 42-48. Luckily, Ji Tianqing had entered Yudu's city in advance to assassinate Commander Mingi. If he had attacked Yudu's city step by step, occupied Netherworld Divine Palace, and then killed Commander Mingi, he would have fallen for the trap. By then, even if Kenshin could take over Yuda's city and control the entire Reincarnation Island, they wouldn't be able to eliminate the source of the problem. Commander Mingi had escaped. Even if he didn't dare to take revenge, he was still a huge threat. With his shrewdness, scheming, and ability, it was impossible for any other God King to go against him. Only the stronger and more meticulous Ji Tianqing could destroy Commander Mingi's scheme. Swoosh! Ji Tianqing decisively left Netherworld Divine Palace and followed the few territorial lords to a certain house in the south of the city. Qianlong and Kuei tribe patriarch, who were in the world inside the bell, didn't know what had happened. Out of curiosity, the two couldn't help but ask Ji Tianqing what had happened. Why didn't he continue to search for Commander Mingi's tracks? Ji Tianqing replied but didn't explain. He just asked them to watch carefully. After a while, Ji Tianqing followed the few territorial lords and arrived at a certain house in the south of the city. The house looked simple, but its interior was exquisite and luxurious. Its defensive power was also very strong. Not only were there 500 elite Imperial Guards standing guard here, there were also over 30 God King experts lying in ambush in various places, either in the open or in the dark. In addition, 2 8th-level Divine King Realm Forbidden Guard commanders were also here. In addition to the 10 domain lords who had just arrived, there were actually 45 Godly King experts gathered in this very ordinary-looking courtyard. The 10 disguised territorial lords entered the underground secret room of the house after a series of checks and identity checks. They finally met Commander Mingi. The thin, white-haired Commander Mingi wore a gray robe. His aura was even colder, and he looked much older than half a year ago. In the dimly lit secret room, he sat on the throne at the head, quietly resting with his eyes closed. 2 Forbidden Guard commanders stood on either side of him, wearing armor and holding swords. They were like 2 door gods. After the 10 domain lords entered the secret chamber, they removed their disguises and revealed their true faces. They bowed and greeted Commander Mingi. After the two sides exchanged greetings, the 10 domain lords stood in 2 rows. Only then did Commander Mingi begin the discussion. He first asked the 10 domain lords about the situation of the city's defenses, as well as the information they had gathered. Next, everyone began to discuss how to set up defenses, arrange troops, and so on. The atmosphere was very oppressive and heavy. Everyone's heart was heavy. None of them were optimistic about the upcoming decisive battle. They were extremely worried. The door to the secret room was shut, and it was protected by a formation. There were 4 God King experts standing guard outside. Ji Tianqing arrived at the gate. Finally, there was no need to hide anymore. He decisively made a move, using a divine ability and ultimate skill to kill the 2 divine king powerhouses guarding the door. At the same time, he opened up the world inside the bell and released Qian Long and Kuei clan's patriarch so that they could kill the other 2 god kings. Swish swish. Bang bang. After a sword light pierced through the air and 2 dull thuds, the 4 god kings guarding the door fell to the ground as blood splattered everywhere. The 2 god kings that Ji Tianqing killed were killed in a single strike. Even their godheads were shattered. As for the 2 god kings that the 2 clan patriarchs dealt with, they only had their heads and necks severed. Their bodies were destroyed, but their godheads were still intact. Ji Tianqing added 2 more sword lights before he was able to instantly kill the 2 god kings. Without a doubt, there was a commotion as an intense divine power fluctuation erupted. Commander Mingi and the 10 domain lords in the secret chamber were immediately awakened. They quickly ended the discussion and checked the situation outside the secret chamber. Ji Tianqing did not hold back as he punched the door of the secret chamber. Kaboom! Following an earth-shattering sound, the door of the secret chamber was blasted into smithereens. A huge hole was blasted in the defensive formation. Dust splattered and covered the secret chamber in a radius of 300 meters. It turned the secret chamber into a turbid mess. With such an unforeseen event, Commander Mingi's pupils contracted. He turned around without hesitation and turned into a black shadow as he flew towards the corner of the secret chamber. In the seemingly empty corner of the secret chamber, there was actually a secret door that led to the array altar underground. It was a teleportation array that was directly connected to Yuda City. It could teleport him to a stronghold 1,000,000 miles away. Before the 10 domain lords could react, they saw Commander Mingi escaping the secret chamber as fast as a ghost. They were stunned. At this moment, Ji Tianqing also turned into a golden light and flew into the secret chamber. He flew over the heads of the 10 domain lords and chased after Commander Mingi. Qian Long and Kuei clan patriarchs were slightly slower. After they followed Ji Tianqing into the secret chamber, they were also stunned. Swish! Ji Tianqing had already gone through the secret passage at the corner of the secret chamber to chase after Commander Mingi. The 2 clan patriarchs were stunned in the middle of the secret chamber as they were stared at by the 10 domain lords. Their bodies instantly stiffened, and their expressions were especially awkward. It's over. This thought flashed across the minds of the 2 clan patriarchs at the same time. After a breath of time, the 10 domain lords finally recovered from their astonishment. Their gazes gathered on the 2 clan patriarchs. After recognizing their identities, their gazes and expressions became strange and complicated. A few of the domain lords revealed killing intent on their faces or revealed sinister sneers. They couldn't afford to offend Kenshin, but could it be that they couldn't afford to offend the 2 clan patriarchs of the ancient clans? Seeing that the 10 domain lords revealed their killing intent and were about to attack, the 2 clan patriarchs were quick-witted and hurriedly spoke to save themselves. Ha ha ha. Qian Long's clan patriarch was complaining incessantly in his heart, but he didn't show any fear on his face. He even laughed loudly with an imposing manner. Lord Kenshin is indeed wise. He guessed that you fellows would come here in the middle of the night to meet Commander Mingi. I didn't expect it to be so. Surrender yourselves. I will plead with Lord Kenshin to spare your lives. The Kuei clan patriarch also reacted and hurriedly put on an arrogant and proud attitude. He sneered at the 10 domain lords and said, "Everyone, you didn't expect this, did you? Ha ha ha. Waiting for Lord Kenshin to lead an army to attack Yuda City. Then the 2 armies will fight head-on. You are too naive. All of Commander Mingi's schemes and plans are under the control of Lord Kenshin. Lord Kenshin has already chased after him, and Commander Mingi is about to lose his life. If you don't want to die, then stay here obediently. When Lord Kenshin returns, immediately admit defeat and surrender. It was clearly the two clan patriarchs who were surrounded by 10 domain lords and were in imminent danger. However, the two of them were arrogant. Their words and attitudes made it seem as if they had surrounded the 10 domain lords. The 10 domain lords originally wanted to attack, but when they saw the reaction of the two clan patriarchs, they instantly hesitated. Kenshin really came? Heavens! Previously, the Grand Commander was worried that Kenshin would sneak into Yuta City and carry out the assassination in advance. I didn't expect that he guessed correctly. That golden light that passed by just now was Kenshin. It passed by right in front of my eyes, but I didn't see it clearly at all. It's over. Kenshin is here. We are all going to die. The 10 domain lords looked at each other and were somewhat flustered as they discussed in a daze. If what the Hidden Dragon Patriarch said was true, then they would have no more worries and could immediately surrender when they saw Kenshin. If the Hidden Dragon Patriarch was lying to deceive them, then it would be too late to kill the Hidden Dragon Patriarch and the Kuei Tribe Patriarch now and escape. Faced with 10 pairs of burning, sharp, and majestic gazes, the Hidden Dragon Patriarch revealed a helpless and bitter smile. He scratched his head and muttered, "It's all my fault for speaking without thinking. Now, Lord Kenshin will definitely punish me." The Kuei Tribe Patriarch also sighed and patted his shoulder, comforting him, "Hidden Dragon Patriarch, you're just too straightforward and can't hide things in your heart. It's because Lord Kenshin understands your nature that he asked me to accompany you. Back then, Kenshin told us to keep this a secret, but you..." Sigh. "Forget it, when Lord Kenshin pursues the matter, I will plead for mercy for you." After hearing the Kuei Tribe Patriarch's comforting words, the Hidden Dragon Patriarch's mood improved a lot. As for the 10 domain lords, when they heard their conversation and saw their expressions and reactions, they all understood the reason and process. It turned out that those words were indeed said by Kenshin. Kenshin told his thoughts to the few ancient clans' patriarchs, but ordered them to keep it a secret and not to casually leak it out. Just now, the Hidden Dragon Patriarch was in a dangerous situation, and in a moment of desperation, he couldn't hold back and revealed the truth. Seeing that the Hidden Dragon Patriarch and the Kuei Tribe Patriarch's reactions didn't seem to be fake, the 10 domain lords were relieved. They looked at each other and hurriedly discussed with each other through telepathy whether they should admit defeat and surrender. At this moment, a loud rumbling sound suddenly came from deep underground. The ground under everyone's feet trembled violently, and a few wide cracks appeared. Obviously, it was caused by the battle between Kenshin and Commander Styx. Commander Styx knew that he couldn't escape, but he couldn't just sit there and wait for death. He could only fight back. Therefore, he unleashed his ultimate skill with all his might to block the 4 sword lights. Unfortunately, the surrounding space had been sealed, and Commander Styx could not move an inch. There was no way for him to dodge. Bang bang. Just as he condensed a shield of divine power, he was struck by the 4 sword lights, and 2 dull thuds rang out. The shield he condensed with all his strength was strong, but it couldn't block the attack of the sword lights. It collapsed on the spot, and fragments of divine light burst out. Then, he was blown away by the sword lights, and he smashed into the sacrificial altar while vomiting blood. Whine. The silent sacrificial altar trembled violently from the impact, and it lit up with hazy 5-colored divine light. Commander Styx finally got close to the sacrificial altar. He just needed to open the teleportation array, and he could leave Yudu. However, his chest and abdomen were pierced by the sword lights, and he was already severely injured. Casting a spell to activate the formation had become an extravagant hope that was impossible to accomplish. Swish swish. Before Commander Styx could get up, Ji Tianqing raised his hand and struck out with two sword lights that were like two bolts of lightning. The underground palace was only 10,000 feet in radius, and the terrain was narrow. The distance between the two was too close. From the time the sword lights lit up to when they hit Commander Styx, it was only 1/5 of an instant. In such a short time, the heavily injured Commander Styx couldn't react at all, let alone cast a spell to block. Bam! The two sword lights hit Commander Styx at the same time, and a loud, dull sound reverberated through the underground. The power of these two swords was too great. Not only did they kill Commander Styx on the spot, but they also smashed him into pieces. After destroying Commander Styx's body, the two sword lights also hit the sacrificial altar. The sacrificial altar, which was 60 feet tall, was smashed into pieces on the spot. Countless rocks and metal splattered out, flashing with divine light. The terrifying force carried countless fragments and formed a shockingly powerful air wave that blasted out in all directions. Instantly, the entire Yudu city started to tremble violently. The courtyard above Ji Tianqing's head was shaken until the sky collapsed and the earth caved in. Dust flew up everywhere. The simple and elegant courtyard collapsed, and a few wide cracks appeared on the ground. The Divine King's strong practitioners who were lying in ambush were also alarmed. In an instant, the entire Yudu city fell into panic. With the courtyard as the center, the surrounding dozens of miles fell into chaos. Commander Styx's body was destroyed, but his godhead was luckily preserved. Swish! The walnut-sized five-colored crystal core burst out with lightning speed and instantly passed through the turbid air wave, trying to escape underground. However, Ji Tianqing waved his hand and struck out with a golden dragon claw, accurately grabbing onto Commander Styx's godhead. There was no superfluous words, and there was no way he would show mercy. No matter how furiously Commander Styx cursed or how helplessly he begged for mercy, it was useless. With a crisp cracking sound, Commander Styx's godhead was crushed by Ji Tianqing, turning into more than a dozen fragments. An overlord of a generation had fallen just like that. Ji Tianqing kept Commander Styx's godhead fragments and passed through the billowing smoke and dust. He ignored the collapsing soil and bricks and left the underground palace. Swish! The next moment, he returned to the surface and appeared in the study that was full of cracks. What was surprising was that the entire courtyard was in a mess. Many guards and Divine King experts were trying to find out what had happened. Meanwhile, the 10 domain lords and the patriarchs of the Hidden Dragon clan and the Kuei clan were still in a deadlock in the study. At this point, the 10 domain lords still hadn't left or escaped. It was enough to prove that they had already discussed and reached a consensus. Even though they were still holding on to their divine weapons and surrounded the patriarchs of the Hidden Dragon clan and the Kuei clan, they didn't have much hostility or killing intent. As for the patriarchs of the Hidden Dragon clan and the Kuei clan, not only were they not worried or apprehensive, but they were also secretly laughing. It was because the conversation between the two was deliberately put on a show to make the 10 domain lords believe them. The facts proved that the 10 domain lords did indeed believe them without any doubts. Your subordinate pays his respects to Lord Kenshin. Everyone in the study was silent. When the two patriarchs suddenly saw Ji Tianqing appear, they quickly bowed and greeted him. The 10 domain lords were also startled. Seeing Kenshin appear, everyone was shocked and instinctively retreated. However, everyone soon reacted and quickly put away their divine weapons and bowed to Ji Tianqing. Greetings to Lord Kenshin. We hope that you will come soon to save the people of Reincarnation Island and restore freedom to everyone. However, as domain lords, we are under the control and restriction of Commander Styx and the Blood Prison Marshal. We really have no choice. Kenshin-sama, you've finally arrived. Commander Mingi used all sorts of methods to restrict us, forcing us to be loyal to him. Otherwise, we would be killed and our entire clan would be wiped out. We look forward to your arrival, not only for the freedom of the people, but also for our freedom and safety. These domain lords were no fools. Kenshin went underground to hunt down Commander Mingi and caused a huge commotion just now. Now that Kenshin had appeared, Commander Mingi was nowhere to be seen. It was obvious that Commander Mingi had been killed or captured by Kenshin. Since Commander Mingi was dead, the fall of Yudu and the capture of Reincarnation Island would soon become a reality. At this time, of course, they had to submit to Kenshin as quickly as possible to prove their loyalty. Moreover, in order to prove their innocence, they could also push all the blame onto Commander Mingi. The 10 domain lords fought to speak, one after another expressing their loyalty, as well as their respect and worship for Kenshin. Seeing how strong their desire to live was, Ji Tianqing sneered to himself. He didn't waste any time and raised his hand to interrupt the 10 domain lords. He took out a jade scroll and threw it in front of everyone. You should know my rules. Those who are sincere in surrendering, recite this oath of surrender. The jade scroll floated in mid-air, shining with a brilliant golden light, looking very sacred and dignified. However, the 10 domain lords stared at the jade scroll with troubled expressions, silently weighing the pros and cons. No matter how nice their words were, when it came to reciting the oath of surrender, they had to seriously consider it and weigh the pros and cons. After all, they had long heard of the horror of the oath of surrender. The domain lord, who looked like a middle-aged scholar, thought for a moment and took the lead to walk out of the crowd, picking up the jade scroll. He had long since understood the logic behind it. Since he had decided to surrender to Kenshin, he had to be decisive and not drag it out. If he acted more sincerely and positively, he could leave a good impression on Kenshin, and he might even be able to keep his position as domain lord. Lord Kenshin, I am the domain lord of Yuanpan. I know my wrongs and want to change, sincerely repent, so I've turned over a new leaf. I hope to serve under Lord Kenshin and make up for my past mistakes. After saying this, he used his consciousness to read the contents of the jade scroll and began to recite the oath of surrender. When he recited the first part of the oath of surrender, his expression became serious, and a hint of fear appeared in his eyes. However, with everyone staring at him, he could not stop, nor did he dare to go back on his words. Thus, he continued to recite. As he recited one oath after another, his face became paler, and cold sweat appeared on his forehead. When the domain lords heard the contents of the oath, their expressions became a little ugly, and their eyes were filled with fear and worry. In the past, they had only heard of how harsh and terrifying the oaths made by Kenshin were. Now that they heard the contents of the oath with their own ears, they knew that the rumors were true. Once they recited the oath of surrender, they would become Kenshin's most loyal lackeys and hounds, and could not have the slightest bit of disloyalty. If they had any thoughts of endangering Kenshin's safety and interests, or disrespecting Kenshin, they would be judged by the heavenly axiom as a violation of the oath, and would be punished by the heavenly axiom, leading to death. This was Kenshin's way of doing things. It was violent and domineering, but it was the most effective. Furthermore, Kenshin did not even need to keep an eye on the person who made the oath, as the heavenly axiom would help to supervise. In comparison, Commander Styx and the Blood Hell Marshal's methods of coercing and forcing them to remain loyal were simply too weak. After a moment, the Yuan and Region Lord finished reciting the oath of the heavenly axiom. His entire body lit up with divine light, and a wisp of Tao runes appeared above his head. Muffled sounds of thunder could be heard in the sky above Yuda city. Such a phenomenon proved that the oath of the heavenly axiom had been established, and he was bound by the heavens. The Yuan and Region Lord felt the vast might of the heavens, and his heart was filled with fear. However, he appeared to be relatively calm, and after bowing respectfully to Ji Tianqing, he put the jade scroll back to its original place. Just as he returned to the crowd, another Region Lord took the initiative to step forward and take the jade scroll to recite the oath. This was also a Region Lord who was determined and wanted to do his best to perform. However, at this moment, the door of the study was blasted open, and the cracked wall on the side was also blasted apart. More than 10 Divine King experts roared as they charged into the messy study. Book Guest Residence Reading Website. Chapter 4252. Previously, Ji Tianqing and Commander Mingi were fighting underground, causing a huge commotion. There were as many as 500 guards stationed in this courtyard, all of them elites. In addition, there were over 30 godly king powerhouses hiding in the courtyard, protecting Commander Mingi. These people were all startled awake, first running in all directions, then asking each other what happened. Guessing that there was an attack, many godly kings and guards searched everywhere for traces of the assassin. But they searched the entire courtyard, as well as the surrounding 20 miles, but did not find anything out of the ordinary. Therefore, many godly kings were certain that the assassin was most likely still in the courtyard. Some godly kings only then remembered that they had not checked on Commander Mingi's condition, whether he was injured or not. But when the dozen godly kings arrived outside the study, they discovered that the defensive array had been activated, isolating the situation in the study, preventing people from probing. Therefore, in their anxiety, the godly kings joined forces to attack the defensive array of the study. Fortunately, that array's defense was not very strong, more to conceal aura, blocking divine senses from probing. After the dozen godly kings joined forces to attack a few times, they actually broke a hole in the array, even collapsing 2 walls. But when they rushed into the study and saw the situation inside clearly, they were dumbfounded on the spot. In the messy study, the 10 domain lords were present, but Commander Mingi was nowhere to be found. The 10 domain lords' expressions and postures were very strange. There was also a dragon clan youth in white robes in the study, looking very mysterious and dignified. Beside that white-robed youth stood 2 unfamiliar godly king powerhouses. And those 10 domain lords' postures seemed to be very respectful to the white-robed youth. What was going on? Who was that white-robed youth? There was silence in the study, everyone looked at each other, but no one spoke. Suddenly, a middle-aged godly king saw the white-robed youth's face clearly, and his expression changed drastically, subconsciously crying out in surprise. Kenshin! He's Kenshin! The sudden cry of surprise was filled with deep shock and fear. The other dozen godly kings were stunned, staring at the white-robed youth in disbelief, carefully observing and sizing him up. When the face of the white-robed young man in front of them overlapped with the face of Kenshin in their memories, everyone was horrified. That's right, he was the famous Kenshin. No one dared to believe that Kenshin would actually sneak into Yuta City alone to assassinate Commander Styx. Most importantly, Kenshin seemed to have succeeded. If Commander Styx was still alive, he would definitely show himself and fight the Kenshin or order his guards to assist him. Since Commander Mingi was nowhere to be found, and the 10 territorial lords were subservient to Kenshin, one could guess that Commander Mingi was most likely dead. Retreat. The first reaction of several god kings was to retreat immediately and flee back to the Netherworld Divine Palace. Commander Acheron might have already died. However, they couldn't rule out the possibility that Commander Styx had escaped back to the Netherworld Divine Palace. There were also 20,000 guards and 200 divine king powerhouses. It could be said to be an impregnable fortress, impregnable as a fortress. In the entire Yuta city, only the Netherworld Divine Palace could be considered safe. 9 god kings instinctively turned and rushed out of the study with this thought in mind. However, there were still 2 god kings who were too loyal to Commander Mingi or were too honest. They actually questioned Ji Tianqing and the 10 territorial lords loudly. Kenshin, you killed Commander Mingi. Territorial lords, where did Commander Mingi go? Is he injured? What are you standing there for? Why aren't you gathering the guards and fighting Kenshin together? The 2 god kings were the captains of Commander Mingi's guards. They had always been in charge of protecting Commander Mingi. Saying these words was only their instinctive reaction. However, the 9 god kings who turned and fled and the 10 territorial lords in the study were stunned when they heard this. They all looked at the 2 god kings in unison, revealing complicated expressions and gazes. Some had an expression of admiration that said, "Brother, you're really awesome." Some didn't know whether to laugh or cry, with a look that said, "Are you two really stupid or just pretending to be stupid?" Some had pity and helplessness in their gazes. The place was temporarily quiet. It was dead silent. Ji Tianqing glanced at the 2 god kings and casually shot out a dazzling golden light, which instantly enveloped the entire residence. Swoosh! A golden light barrier with a radius of 3,000 feet sealed the entire residence. Immediately, all the guards and god kings who scurried about frantically in the courtyard in search of the Styx commander all froze. Everyone raised their heads and looked at the golden light barrier, revealing angry and helpless expressions. "Since you're here, stay," Ji Tianqing said indifferently. The 12 god kings seemed to have woken up from a dream, and they immediately revealed looks of regret. It was obvious that Kenshin planned to kill them all. If they knew this would happen, they wouldn't have stopped just now. They would have fled without a care. And now, the entire residence was sealed. It was impossible to escape even if they wanted to. The patriarch of the Hidden Dragon clan and the Kuei clan reacted. They hurriedly held their divine weapons and shouted at the 12 god kings at the door, "What are you waiting for? Get in here if you don't want to die. Lord Kenshin is here. If you know what's good for you, immediately admit defeat and surrender." Actually, everyone had already thought about it. Commander Mingi was definitely not Kenshin's match, and Yudu City would fall sooner or later. Therefore, this outcome was within their expectations. What they cared about the most was whether Kenshin would forgive them and spare their lives. They were so flustered just now because they were afraid that Kenshin would kill them all with just a few moves. Now, it seemed that Kenshin wasn't that cruel and violent. As long as they admitted defeat and surrendered, they still had a chance to live. The 12 god kings heaved a sigh of relief and returned to the study. Only the 2 guard captains of Commander Mingi's guards stood awkwardly on the spot. Just now, no one else spoke. Only the 2 of them questioned Kenshin and the 10 region lords righteously. They appeared to be very loyal to Commander Mingi. Now, if they didn't surrender, they would be killed. If they surrendered, it would seem that they had no moral integrity and backbone. It was too embarrassing. Luckily, everyone's minds were in a mess, and their thoughts were complicated. No one cared about their situation. The 12 god kings entered the study and bowed in unison, expressing their allegiance to Ji Tianqing. Ji Tianqing didn't waste any time. He couldn't even be bothered to say any high-sounding words. He directly ordered, "All of you, line up and recite the oath of surrender." Therefore, the 12 god kings instantly understood. No wonder the 10 region lords were gathered here. It looked so strange. It turned out that they were the first to admit defeat and were reciting the oath of surrender. Too despicable. These fellows were in high positions and were usually more loyal than anyone else. They didn't expect that they would surrender the moment something happened to Commander Mingi. Chapter 42-53. The 12 or so god kings and domain lords in the study came from different factions and were not harmonious with each other. In the past, everyone would fight to be the first to show their loyalty to Commander Styx and the Netherworld Divine Emperor. Because of this, there was no lack of scheming among them. Now that something had happened to Commander Styx, they had no choice but to surrender to Kenshin. Seeing the 10 domain lords surrender first and being very respectful in front of Kenshin, the 12 or so god kings were jealous and angry. They only hated themselves for not surrendering to Kenshin at the first moment. If they had performed well, they might have been able to get an official position under Kenshin. Furthermore, in front of Kenshin, it was impossible for them to play any tricks or schemes. Next, the few domain lords no longer hesitated. They all rushed to receive the jade scrolls and quickly recited the oath of surrender. Soon, divine light and Tao runes appeared on the domain lords who had recited the oath of surrender. Shocking thunder boomed in the sky above Yuta City. Ji Tianqing used his divine senses to scan the courtyard and the situation in Yuta City. He realized that the courtyard was in a mess. 500 guards and a dozen or so god kings were trying to break out of the encirclement and break through the golden light barrier. Those people already knew that something had happened to Commander Styx and guessed that Kenshin was in the study, so they didn't dare to go near. To prevent any accidents from happening, Ji Tianqing ordered the 2 clan leaders and the 3 domain lords who had already surrendered, gather everyone in the courtyard. Those who are willing to surrender, gather in the courtyard. Those who are unwilling to surrender and resist with all their might, kill them without mercy. The Hidden Dragon clan, the Kuei clan leader, and the 3 domain lords hurriedly obeyed and ran out of the study happily to carry out the mission. Especially the 3 domain lords who had just sworn the oath of surrender. They were indescribably surprised. After all, they had just surrendered and received a mission from Kenshin. This meant that Kenshin trusted them and gave them a chance to perform. Didn't they see the envious expressions of those god kings and domain lords who were preparing to surrender? Such a good mission and opportunity to perform, they had to grasp it well and not screw it up. With such feelings, the 3 domain leaders and the 2 clan leaders rushed into the house and flew into the night sky to carry out their mission. Under their shouts, threats, explanations, and persuasions, the 500 guards and god kings stopped panicking. They all quieted down. The 2 clan chiefs spoke the truth, saying that Kenshin Great One was here, already killing the Styx commander. All the soldiers under Mingi's command could be spared from death if they surrendered. Just as Ji Tianqing said, the last trace of hope in their hearts was destroyed and dissipated. Since Commander Mingi was dead, what was the point of their stubborn resistance? Even if there were still 50,000 soldiers and more than 200 god kings in Yuta City, what was the use? It's not that we don't want to risk our lives and fight, nor is it that we are not loyal. It's just that Commander Mingi died too quickly. These thoughts flashed through everyone's minds at the same time. Thus, the 400 guards and the dozen or so god kings no longer hesitated and bowed in unison, expressing their loyalty to Ji Tianqing. The previous scene repeated itself. Ji Tianqing waved his hand and shot out a white light that condensed into a huge screen of light. It floated in the night sky and displayed a simplified version of the oath of surrender. The guards and god kings were already mentally prepared. Without needing Ji Tianqing to say anything, they all recited the oath of surrender. 100 breaths later, close to 500 people recited the oath of surrender. Their bodies lit up with divine light, and a trace of Tao aura appeared above their heads. In the sky above Yuta City, lightning flashed and thunder roared again. Just like that, all the guards and god kings in this house were subdued by Ji Tianqing. Next, Ji Tianqing started to give orders and assign many tasks. He first sent a message to the 5,000 soldiers stationed outside the city and ordered them to prepare for battle immediately and wait for orders to attack the south city gate of Yuta City. Then, he ordered the 2 region lords to lead 4 godly king experts to take over the control of the southern city gate. These 6 experts needed to control the south city gate and find a way to remove the poisonous fog outside the city. When the Rebel Alliance's army reached the city, they still needed to open the city gate and welcome the army in. Next, Ji Tianqing ordered more than 20 god kings and 6 region lords to rush back to the Netherworld Divine Palace immediately. Their task was very simple. They were to fabricate lies and deceive the soldiers stationed at the Netherworld Divine Palace so that they would continue to defend and not retreat. The 3 of them maintained their invisible state and traveled through Yuta City. After observing, they realized that Yuta City was already in chaos. Lights were everywhere, and figures were moving about. There were also countless strong practitioners flying to and fro in the night sky. The huge commotion from before had turned the entire Yuda city upside down. The ground had cracked, and the buildings had collapsed. The 1 million civilians who remained in the city were shocked. They fled in panic and shouted. Of the 30,000 soldiers guarding Yuda city, close to 10,000 were sent out to patrol and search for traces of the assassins. The 20,000 soldiers guarding the Netherworld Divine Palace strictly followed Commander Styx's orders. No matter what happened outside, they didn't let down their guard and continued to guard their posts. However, the 200 god kings in the Divine Palace were more free. Half of them flew out of the Divine Palace and were investigating the situation in Yuda city. After that, Ji Tianqing forced the 10 domain lords, close to 500 guards, and god kings to swear a heavenly Tao oath, which caused a phenomenon in heaven and earth. In the sky above Yuda city, shocking lightning kept exploding, and deafening thunder boomed. The terrifying might of heaven enveloped the entire Yuda city, causing everyone to be terrified. The civilians who were fleeing in panic saw that Yuda city was sealed and couldn't escape. They could only hide in their own residences. The soldiers guarding the city and patrolling guards were also playing their roles actively. They comforted the frightened civilians and quickly restored order and peace. Ji Tianqing flew in the city for a while and observed the situation in the city. He then made a decision. The situation wasn't bad. At least, there wasn't too much chaos, and there wasn't a large batch of soldiers escaping Yuda city. From this, it could be seen that the 50,000 soldiers and 200 god kings had firm wills. They were also very loyal to Commander Styx. It was also because of this that he couldn't let these people escape Yuda city. He had to plan carefully and catch them all in one fell swoop. Otherwise, if these soldiers were scattered all over Reincarnation Island, they would stir up trouble in the future. The chiefs of Hidden Dragon and Kuei tribe followed behind Ji Tianqing. After a long silence, they finally couldn't help but ask. Lord Kenshin, Commander Styx has been killed by you. Yudu city has no leader. What should we do next? Lord, I think that if we wait for Chief Song He to lead the army here, it will take a few more days. The people of Yudu city are already in a state of panic. If we delay, there might be changes. We have to attack the city as soon as possible and take control of this city. The 7,500 soldiers led by Chief Song He hadn't arrived yet. Chapter 42-55. Ji Tianqing's plan to devour the whale was gradually being carried out. He brought the two chiefs to walk around Yuda city. Seeing that the region lords and divine kings were carrying out their mission seriously, quickly pacifying and suppressing the chaos in the city, Ji Tianqing was finally at ease. Around 4 to 6 hours later, dawn arrived, and a new day was about to arrive. Although the people in Yuda city were still in fear, the entire city had regained its peace. At this time, the Yuan and region lord and the rest had already taken over the South City Gate and had it under their control. Ji Tianqing secretly went to the South City Gate, and with the cooperation of the Yuan and region lord, he released the two tribe leaders from Yuda city. The Hidden Dragon and Kuei tribe leaders left Yuda city and returned to the army. They would personally lead their disciples and wait for Ji Tianqing's orders. Ji Tianqing stayed in Yuda city alone and continued his series of plans. He went to Yuda Divine Palace again and passed through the crack in the formation, silently entering the Divine Palace. On the other side, the region lords and over 20 divine kings also gradually took control of the entire Divine Palace. They controlled the Divine Palace where Commander Mingi usually resided. They held Commander Mingi's medallion, controlling and commanding 20,000 soldiers and 200 god kings. With their cooperation, Ji Tianqing entered the Divine Palace without any obstructions and took over Commander Mingi's residence. In this way, he wouldn't be discovered by the other divine kings if he hid in the Divine Palace. The sun rose, and a new day arrived. In the morning, the region lords and over 20 divine kings gathered close to 200 divine kings and generals under his orders to discuss matters in the meeting hall. The region lords told the generals about what happened last night, as well as Commander Mingi's whereabouts and plans. Commander Mingi escaped and shook off Kenshin's pursuit. During this period of time, they would pass on Commander Mingi's orders and command the defense of Yuta City. No matter what happened, Yuta City couldn't fall into chaos, and Yuta Divine Palace had to be strictly guarded. Nothing could go wrong. If anyone left their post or escaped, they would be executed on the spot. There was no tolerance. Most of the god kings and generals had no objections to this. Everyone was willing to hole up in Yuta City and hide in the Netherworld Divine Palace, waiting for Commander Mingi to return. However, among the many god kings, the patriarchs and elders of 4 ancient clans were extremely dissatisfied with this and raised their doubts. Their loyalty to Commander Styx was lower, their own forces were stronger, and their sense of smell was sharper. They had sensed a conspiracy and danger in this incident. They refused to believe the domain masters and the 20 or so god generals and commanders. Regarding this, the territorial leaders could only explain it in front of everyone. Seeing that the patriarchs and elders of the clans didn't listen at all and still didn't believe it, the domain masters asked them to stay and talk in detail after the meeting. Next, the territorial lords and the most powerful divine generals and commanders made some slight adjustments to the military deployment of Nether God Palace. After the meeting was over, the god kings bid farewell and left to carry out their missions. Only the patriarchs and elders of the 4 ancient clans remained in the conference hall, waiting for the territorial leaders to give a reasonable explanation. They insisted that if the territorial leaders couldn't produce sufficient evidence, they wouldn't be convinced and would refuse to listen to their orders. The best way was to find a way to get in touch with the Nether River commander and have them talk to him. The territorial leaders smiled and nodded in agreement, saying that these conditions could be fulfilled. Thus, the patriarchs and elders of the 4 ancient clans remained in the conference hall, waiting for the results. However, something unexpected happened. More than 10 god generals and commanders quietly left the conference hall and activated the defensive formation of the entire Divine Palace. A total of 3 formations were activated at the same time. The outermost formation had a concealment effect, blocking all divine senses. The middle formation had a strong defense, and the innermost formation was a sealing formation that sealed the entire Divine Palace. This way, the people outside wouldn't be able to know what was happening inside the Divine Palace. Even if the patriarchs and elders of the 4 ancient clans were killed by the crowd, it wouldn't alarm anyone else. Sensing that the situation wasn't good, the experts of the 4 ancient clans were full of vigilance and immediately jumped up. They took out their divine weapons and looked at the territorial leaders and the god kings warily. They asked loudly, "What are you doing? Are you trying to silence us? I've always thought that you were a little strange. Now, it seems that there is indeed something wrong with you." The patriarchs and elders of the 4 clans were alert. They had long been on guard and were about to draw their swords against each other. However, the territorial leaders didn't panic at all. They smiled and said, "What's the rush? Didn't you want to see Commander Mingi? We'll let you see him immediately." The patriarchs and elders of the 4 ancient clans were stunned and subconsciously looked at the secret door in the corner of the conference hall. At this moment, Ji Tianxing, who was dressed in a white robe and had a dignified expression, walked out of the secret door in the corner. When he appeared, the gazes of the patriarchs and elders of the 4 clans immediately gathered on him. They were dumbfounded at that moment. The conference hall was silent and the atmosphere was very awkward. Even a fool would know that the white-robed youth wasn't Commander Mingi. However, the 4 patriarchs and elders all felt that the white-robed youth's appearance was very familiar, as if they had seen him somewhere before. After a moment of absent-mindedness, they finally remembered. That handsome, dignified, mysterious, and dignified white-robed youth should be the legendary Kenshin. The super expert whose name shook the world and shook the God world. The peerless genius who claimed that he would unify the God world and fight against the 5 God emperors. At this moment, the 4 patriarchs and elders' legs were about to turn to jelly, and their faces were full of shock. A few elders with weaker self-control couldn't help but exclaim, "Kenshin! He's Kenshin!" The shouts of these elders were purely superfluous. The people present weren't stupid. Who didn't know that it was Kenshin? However, their exclamations made the atmosphere even heavier and more oppressive. When the 4 patriarchs and elders saw Ji Tianqing walk to the throne at the head of the table, they all subconsciously retreated. They were well aware that the entire divine palace was sealed by a great array and that no matter how hard they tried, they couldn't escape from this divine palace. However, their instincts drove them to move away from Ji Tianqing to obtain a faint sense of security. Ji Tianqing sat down on the throne at the head of the table and looked at the 4 patriarchs and elders indifferently. "Since this lord has appeared here, I'm sure you've already guessed what's going on. If you don't want to die, obediently surrender and pledge your loyalty if you know what's good for you." These 2 simple sentences shocked everyone present. The patriarchs and elders of the 4 ancient clans were speechless and their anger and killing intent dissipated. Chapter 42-56. The patriarchs and elders of the 4 clans were not stupid. They immediately saw through the trick and guessed the truth. Since Commander Styx had disappeared and Kenshin had appeared in this divine palace, the domain lords and the many divine kings seemed to be very respectful to Kenshin. They looked submissive and flattering. It was obvious that Kenshin had indeed infiltrated Yuda's city to assassinate Commander Styx. But the outcome was not as the domain lords had said. Commander Styx had been injured and escaped. Instead, he had been killed by Kenshin. The current situation was obvious. The domain lords and the many divine kings in the main hall had long submitted to Kenshin. They had become Kenshin's spies and controlled the Netherworld Divine Palace. Next, the other party would definitely think of a way to control the entire Netherworld Divine Palace and then Yuda City. Facing the mysterious and powerful Kenshin, the patriarchs and elders of the 4 clans did not have any intention of resisting. Not to mention the fact that Kenshin had the domain lords and the many divine kings beside him. Even if Kenshin was alone, they did not have the guts to attack. Even if they had 12 divine kings, they were not confident that they could defeat Kenshin alone. This was the deterrence of a peerless expert. The 4 patriarchs and elders were silent. They were silently weighing the pros and cons in their hearts. They were not willing to speak. Although they had predicted the outcome and knew that they could not resist today, they had pride and dignity. However, everyone had their own pride and backbone. Due to this problem, they didn't want to appear too weak to avoid being mocked by others. But Ji Tianqing did not have the time to slowly waste time with them. He directly released a violent divine aura that swept towards them. "I will give you 10 breaths of time. If you do not surrender, you will be killed without mercy." The 4 patriarchs and elders were stunned. They immediately showed fear in their eyes. They hurriedly looked at each other and communicated with their eyes. But everyone was in despair and helplessness. No one could think of a way or come up with any ideas that could change the situation. Time passed by breath after breath. Everyone was under immense pressure. They were enduring the torment and the threat of death. Soon, the 10 breaths of time would be up. Finally, one of the patriarchs could not withstand the pressure and took the lead to lower his head to Ji Tianqing. "Please calm down, Lord Kenshin. We were only loyal to Commander Styx and the god of the underworld because of the circumstances. Since Commander Mingi had already been executed, Lord Sword God had to take control of Yudu and even the entire Reincarnation Island. It was what everyone wanted. We, the Sky Heart Tribe, are willing to pledge our loyalty to Lord Kenshin and contribute to Lord Kenshin's great cause of unifying the entire Reincarnation Island. Clan head Tion Xian first explained himself to clear the relationship between the Sky Heart race and Commander Styx. Then, he expressed his respect for Kenshin and flattered him a little. No one knew exactly what he was thinking and what he was thinking. But this process had to be done. Even if he surrendered, at least it would look more dignified. After clan leader Ji Tianqing finished speaking, the other three clan leaders saw that he was the first to surrender and no longer had any reservations. They all expressed their loyalty to Ji Tianqing. Since the four clan leaders were all willing to surrender and pledge their loyalty, this matter was settled. Ji Tianqing waved his hand and threw out a jade scroll. It flew in front of the four clan leaders and made them read the oath of surrender one by one. He knew that the four patriarchs were exceptionally loyal to Commander Styx. Thus, he could not be bothered to probe their sincerity in surrendering, much less entrust them with important tasks. He only forced them to read the oath of surrender and not cause trouble in the future. The four clan leaders did not know what Ji Tianqing was thinking. They still thought that since they had surrendered, they had to show off in front of Kenshin no matter what. Thus, they scrambled to snatch the jade scroll and took the initiative to read the oath of surrender. The domain lords and many divine kings had seen this scene before and could guess what the four clan leaders were thinking. They couldn't help but sneer inwardly. Not long after, the four clan leaders read the oath of surrender one by one. At this moment, their bodies lit up with divine light, and Tao runes appeared above their heads. Above Yuda's city, lightning flashed, and thunder rumbled. Feeling the mysterious heavenly might, the four clan leaders kept quiet out of fear, their hearts filled with unease. Now, even if they were given 10 guts, they would not dare to disobey Kenshin's orders. But this matter was not over yet. Ji Tianqing took out a simple oath of surrender and threw it to the 8 clan leaders, asking them to read it in front of everyone. Although the four clan leaders could represent their clans, Ji Tianqing was not afraid of them playing tricks, they had not sworn an oath of surrender. However, the 8 elders did not swear an oath to the Tao of Heaven. If they intentionally or unintentionally leaked any information and harmed Ji Tianqing's interests, that would be unforgivable. To prevent such a thing from happening, it was more reliable to make them swear an oath. The 8 clan leaders did not expect Kenshin to target them. While they complained in their hearts, they could only obediently read the oath of surrender. They had no choice. Their clan leaders had already surrendered and pledged their loyalty. They could not possibly resist, right? Not to mention that if they resisted, it would make things difficult for the clan leaders. Just Kenshin's anger alone could easily take their lives. In order to protect themselves, it was better to obediently pledge their loyalty. Anyway, the many god kings in the hall had already sworn their oaths of surrender, so it was not embarrassing. Just like that, after a few minutes, the 8 clan leaders had all surrendered. In the sky above Yuda's city, the dull sound of thunder rang out again. The tens of thousands of guards in the city, as well as the millions of citizens, were all shocked by the mighty heavenly might and the rumbling thunder. The citizens were all anxious and secretly discussed why such a phenomenon of heaven and earth had appeared again. Such a phenomenon appeared last night, and it was said that Kenshin had come to assassinate Commander Styx. Why did it appear again today? Could it be that Kenshin was still in Yuda's city? Was he still fighting with Commander Styx? That was impossible. If that was the case, Yuda's city would not be so peaceful. It would have been destroyed by the aftermath of the battle between the two experts. Therefore, some citizens guessed that Kenshin was the favored child of the heavens, the embodiment of justice, representing the heavenly Tao to protect the order of the god world. This should be the tyranny of Commander Styx and the god of the underworld, which angered the heavens, so such a lightning punishment was sent down, right? The citizens discussed fervently, and there were all kinds of strange theories. Fortunately, there were many experts and guards in the city, so the city could still maintain its peace and did not become chaotic. Not long after, the patriarchs and elders of the four clans left the discussion hall with normal expressions. The 3 god formations of the god palace were also closed, and everything returned to normal. Some of the guards and soldiers outside, even if they had some doubts, did not dare to casually discuss or ask. Even if there were some generals who asked the 4 clan leaders what had happened previously. The 4 clan leaders and the 8 clan leaders also said that they had received a message from Commander Styx in the hall, and they had to keep it a secret before activating the defensive formation. This explanation was still reasonable, and it deceived all the guards and soldiers. The 4 clan leaders and the clan leaders under them returned to their respective posts and continued to carry out their missions like before, without any abnormalities. In the evening, more than 10 God King experts were ordered to rush to the meeting hall to accept a mission. Clearly, Ji Tianqing had started to nibble away at the 200 God Kings in the Netherworld God Palace. Book House Reading Website. They gathered 20,000 soldiers and announced a major event. In order to ensure that this top-secret information would not be leaked, they had to activate the defensive formation of the Netherworld Divine Palace. In addition, the 20,000 soldiers had to temporarily leave the sentry post and gather at the square. This strange order came at the right time. At the very least, the 20,000 soldiers knew that the questions in their hearts would soon be answered. Therefore, the soldiers left their posts and rushed to the square in the middle of the Divine Palace. The square with a radius of 10,000 feet was large enough to accommodate 20,000 soldiers. They lined up in the square according to different forces and formations. Close to 100 Divine King powerhouses surrounded the plaza, waiting patiently. There were also dozens of God Kings who went to activate the defensive array of the Netherworld Divine Palace. Swoosh! Swish! Not long after, divine light soared into the sky from all directions, forming a huge screen of light. Soon, all the formations within a radius of 15 miles were activated, forming a semicircular blood-colored screen of light that sealed the entire Netherworld Divine Palace. The blood-colored screen of light blocked out divine consciousness. Everything that happened in the Divine Palace could not be detected by the outside world. Seeing this, the 20,000 soldiers on the square immediately panicked and worried. Many of them had a bad premonition. Fortunately, the domain lords led many divine generals and commanders to appear above the square in time, attracting everyone's attention. These domain masters, divine generals, and commanders were the strongest, most powerful experts under Commander Mingi's command. In other words, they were also the core leaders of Yuta City and the tens of thousands of soldiers. Since they had appeared, the 20,000 soldiers waited patiently to see what they were going to announce and how they were going to explain it. However, what happened next left the 20,000 soldiers dumbfounded. The domain lords looked at the 20,000 soldiers with faint smiles on their faces. Someone directly announced a piece of news. 2 days ago, the famous Lord Kenshin did indeed sneak into Yuta City to assassinate Commander Mingi. Commander Mingi had expected this day to come, so he was not in the Netherworld Divine Palace. He led many guards and powerhouses to hide in a house in the southern part of the city. He originally wanted to escape from Yuta City in the chaos when Kenshin attacked the Netherworld Divine Palace, abandoning all his soldiers. Unfortunately, the wise and mighty Lord Kenshin still found him and killed him easily with lightning speed. Upon hearing this shocking news, the 20,000 soldiers were dumbfounded and petrified on the spot. Such an earth-shattering change caused everyone to be extremely shocked, and their minds went blank. These were the elite soldiers under their command. For them to perform in such an unsightly manner was a disgrace to them. Fortunately, Ji Tianqing did not mind this. He calmly waved his hand and shot out a white light, which condensed into a huge white light screen in the sky. A large number of golden words appeared on the white light screen, showing a simplified version of the surrender oath of about 300 words. There was no need for Ji Tianqing to explain anything. Everyone understood that the 20,000 soldiers had to swear this oath to the heavenly Tao before they could be considered to have surrendered and pledged their loyalty. A familiar scene appeared once again. The 20,000 soldiers carefully read the oath of the heavenly Tao on the light screen. The more they read, the paler their faces became, and the more frightened they became. The oath's content was harsh and complicated. It was truly unprecedented and made one's scalp tingle. In the past, many soldiers had heard that when Kenshin ruled the boundless heaven continent, he made a terrifying oath of the heavenly Tao. The content was very frightening. Everyone thought that it was just forcing the enemy to swear an oath of surrender. It was nothing more than using their lives as a threat. What was there to be afraid of? But now, everyone saw the content of the oath with their own eyes. Only then did they know that the frightening thing was not the consequences of violating the oath. Instead, this oath of the heavenly Tao was very detailed. It took into account all the possibilities that the swearer could harm Kenshin's interests and threaten Kenshin's safety. In other words, as long as they made this oath of the heavenly Tao, even if the soldiers did not mean what they said and secretly talked about Kenshin, it was not allowed. Even if they had disrespectful or hateful thoughts toward Kenshin, directly or indirectly harmed Kenshin's interests, or passively treated Kenshin's orders, they would be punished by the heavens. But anyone who made the oath of the heavenly Tao must be loyal to Kenshin wholeheartedly. Otherwise, they would be reduced to ashes. The 20,000 soldiers suddenly understood. No wonder those 190 divine kings, their leaders were all so obedient and were very respectful toward Kenshin. It turned out that it was all the effect of the oath of the heavenly Tao. The plaza experienced a brief silence. Some soldiers with stronger mental fortitude began to recite the oath of surrender. The other soldiers came back to their senses. They were afraid that they would show too much hesitation and resistance, and be killed on the spot as a warning to others. Therefore, they did not hesitate anymore and hurriedly recited the oath loudly. The plaza immediately became lively, clamorous, and a boiling cauldron of voices. The order in which the 20,000 soldiers recited the oath was different. Their voices were either loud or soft and were not uniform. Just by listening to the voices, it was very hard to distinguish who recited the oath and who muddled through. But one thing was very obvious. They could clearly distinguish who was reciting the oath of the heavenly Tao. That was, when the oath of the heavenly Tao was recited halfway, divine light would light up all over the person reciting it. Tao rhymes would appear above their heads. This was the most obvious mark. There was no need for Ji Tianqing to supervise and check. The 190 divine king experts consciously carried out their duty of supervision. Even though 99% of the soldiers were very honest, there were still a dozen or so soldiers who played tricks. They pretended to be reciting the oath, but in reality, they were spouting nonsense. A few divine king experts pulled those people out and killed them on the spot. Their methods were even more ruthless than Ji Tianqing's. This action indeed intimidated all the soldiers, causing them to be filled with fear. No one dared to play tricks anymore. Even those who spoke slowly were so frightened that they hurriedly sped up and finished reciting the oath of surrender as soon as possible. Even so, it took a full 15 minutes for the 20,000 soldiers to recite the oath of surrender one after another. Everyone was enveloped by divine light, and a wisp of faintly discernible Tao rhymes appeared above their heads. In the sky above Yuda's city, thunderbolts that covered the sky and earth appeared again. They flashed and boomed continuously. Yuda's city, which was almost drowned by the lightning in the sky, fell into panic once again. The million citizens were on tenterhooks as they discussed quietly. The 30,000 soldiers guarding the city still didn't know what was going on. They were also very flustered and worried, and they all sent messages to the god generals to report. Those soldiers guarding the city would never have thought that their generals had long pledged their loyalty to the Kenshin. Hence, the reply that the 30,000 soldiers received was also very easy to guess. Naturally, it was for them to remain calm and not panic. When the soldiers guarding the city received the reply, they were still skeptical. However, there was nothing they could do. They could only stick to their posts. Not long later, the 20,000 soldiers of the Netherworld Divine Palace had all surrendered. The entire Netherworld Divine Palace had completely fallen into Ji Tianqing's control. He also appeared openly and didn't need to hide anymore. At this point, the plan to swallow the whale was more than half completed. As long as he subdued the 30,000 soldiers guarding the city, it would be over. Chapter 42-59. Not only did Ji Tianqing control the Netherworld God Palace, but he also subdued 20,000 soldiers. The 18 domain lords, the patriarchs and elders of the 4 ancient clans, the commanders of the imperial guards, and the inspector of the city guards were all under his command. In this way, all of the mainstays under Commander Mingyi's command were taken care of in one fell swoop. Just as the Netherworld God Palace regained its peace, Ji Tianqing received a message from clan head Song He. As it turned out, the 7,500 soldiers led by clan head Song He had finally arrived outside Yuta City and met up with the Hidden Dragon clan and the Kuei clan. Since the 5 clans under the Rebel Alliance were all here, Ji Tianqing didn't waste any more time and prepared to completely occupy Yuta City. He first sent 6 region lords and 30 God King experts to take over the east, west, and north city gates of Yuta City. Within 2 hours, the 36 experts completed their missions. In this way, the 4 city gates of Yuta City were all under Ji Tianqing's control. He then sent a message to the 5 clan heads of Song He, Hidden Dragon clan, and Kuei clan. He ordered them to split into 2 groups and enter the south and east city gates respectively. In any case, the people guarding the city gates were their own people, so the disciples of the 5 clans could enter directly. After entering Yuta City, they only had one goal, and that was to control the soldiers guarding the 2 city gates as soon as possible. After the 5 clan heads received the order, they immediately started their preparations. Ji Tianqing also sent out the commander of the royal guards and a god general to lead over a dozen god kings and close to 10,000 soldiers to the north and west city gates respectively. Their mission was to control the soldiers guarding the 2 city gates. Other than that, Ji Tianqing also asked the city guard's governor to lead over 3,000 soldiers to control the city protection formation. Ji Tianqing only had one request for the various armies, and that was to control the 30,000 soldiers guarding the city. None of them could escape. The various god kings and soldiers received the order and immediately took action. Next, an inconceivable scene appeared in the seemingly calm Yuta City. At the southern and eastern city gates, the armies of the Sword God Subjugation Alliance were marching toward the 2 gates in a majestic manner. The soldiers guarding the city gates didn't stop or kill them. Instead, they quickly opened the city gates and welcomed the 2 armies into the city. This scene dumbfounded the guards near the 2 city gates. This was especially true for the soldiers stationed on the city walls and patrolling in the sky. They were so shocked that they almost fell to the ground. However, an even more preposterous scene occurred. After the 2 armies of the Rebel Alliance entered the city, the God King experts and soldiers guarding the city gates actually joined forces with the enemy and captured the soldiers guarding the city gates. The soldiers guarding the city couldn't react and they couldn't accept this fact. They couldn't believe that their generals and brothers were actually allied with the enemy. What's wrong with this world? Isn't this too ridiculous? There was no need to doubt the outcome. Those soldiers guarding the city who were in a daze were captured and obediently surrendered. What was even more hilarious was that the God King experts guarding the city gates didn't even need to do anything. They just needed to give an order and those soldiers guarding the city gates surrendered. Of course, there were also a small number of soldiers guarding the city who were very unyielding or very loyal to Commander Mingyi. When they sensed that the Yuta city had changed hands, they would rather die than submit. They even wanted to self-destruct and perish together with the traitors. This was all within the expectations of the God King experts. They promptly took action and used their lightning-fast methods to extinguish the flames of self-destruction. They didn't cause any damage. The same scene was playing out at the west and north city gates of the Yuda city. When the soldiers guarding the city saw the Forbidden Army commander and the city guard army supervisor bringing thousands of soldiers to the vicinity of the city gates, they were very surprised and curious. Of course, they could recognize that the thousands of soldiers were the elite soldiers guarding the Netherworld God Palace. Most of them were Forbidden Army soldiers. In other words, those soldiers were even more elite than the soldiers guarding the city. Their statuses were also slightly higher. It was really strange. What were the Forbidden Army soldiers doing at the city gates instead of guarding the Netherworld God Palace? After that, the Forbidden Army commander and the city guard army supervisor ordered the soldiers guarding the city to surrender. This baffling order caused the soldiers guarding the city to be at a loss. They couldn't make heads or tails of it. However, many of the soldiers guarding the city instinctively put away their weapons and assumed a posture of surrender. As for those soldiers guarding the city who had yet to react, they were still whispering to each other or asking each other what was going on. The Forbidden Army commander and the city guard army supervisor didn't waste any time. They immediately ordered the elite soldiers under their command to surround the soldiers guarding the city and capture them on the spot. A small number of soldiers guarding the city realized that the situation wasn't good and hurriedly turned to flee. However, the Great City Protecting Formation had always been activated. Moreover, it was controlled by someone to seal off the Yuda city, making it impossible to enter or leave. Those God Lord Realm soldiers guarding the city naturally couldn't break through the Great City Protecting Formation. They were quickly captured. What happened next was logical. When the conditions were right, success was achieved naturally. The various armies used the 4 city gates as the center and started to search the center of Yuda city. They captured all the soldiers guarding the city and patrolling guards along the way. 4 hours later, the various armies brought close to 30,000 captives and gathered at the plaza in the center of the city. That plaza with a radius of 30,000 feet was enough to accommodate over 100,000 people. At this moment, the 20,000 soldiers under Ji Tianqing's command escorted close to 30,000 soldiers guarding the city. They didn't feel crowded when they gathered at the plaza. Even though the soldiers guarding the city felt wronged and puzzled, they didn't dare to make a ruckus under the heavy atmosphere. They could only discuss in secret and ask what was going on. In addition, there were also 3,000 soldiers searching for the soldiers guarding the city and patrolling guards in Yuda city. After all, there were only 29,200 people that were captured on the plaza. There were still over 700 soldiers that weren't captured. The commoners of Yuda city also discovered the drastic change in the city. They were filled with doubts and couldn't make heads or tails of it. In their eyes, the 5 families of the Rebel Alliance had killed their way into Yuda city, which meant that the Kenshin had also come. It should have been a chaotic situation. In the end, not only did the soldiers guarding Yuda city not deal with the Rebel Alliance's army, they even joined forces with the Rebel Alliance to capture the soldiers guarding the city. Helping the enemy to capture their own people. What was this called? The commoners of Yuda city were still slightly different from the commoners of Reincarnation Island. The commoners that lived in this city were all either rich or noble. The soldiers under Commander Mingi and Marshal Blood Prison had many descendants and branches over the past 1,000 years. There were also many relatives and so on. In short, the commoners of this city were even more loyal to Commander Mingi and the god of the underworld. They weren't like the commoners of Reincarnation Island who welcomed the Kenshin to save Reincarnation Island. On the contrary, they would rather the Kenshin be defeated and Yuda City and Reincarnation Island maintain the status quo. Book Guest Residence Reading Website. Chapter 4260. Of course, no matter how much the citizens of Yuda City didn't welcome the Kenshin, they didn't have the guts to unite and resist. They could only watch in the dark and observe the changes. After all, many of the citizens were nobles and had heard some news from various sources. Although they didn't know the truth, they could guess that Commander Styx had died long ago with their sharp senses. Since the Kenshin had already taken control of the situation, it was only a matter of time before they took over Yuta's city and Reincarnation Island. They were powerless to change the outcome, so they could only accept it silently. Unknowingly, another 4 hours passed. The 3,000 elite soldiers searched around Yudu's city twice and finally captured the remaining 700+ soldiers and patrolling guards. When these soldiers were brought to the plaza in the city, the 30,000 soldiers were finally gathered. The more than 20,000 captives who had been waiting in the square had long been exhausted and tortured. Waiting in the unknown was the scariest, especially when they didn't know what their fate would be. At first, they were uneasy, but as they let their imaginations run wild, they were filled with fear. Now that the 30,000 soldiers were gathered, they guessed that the time to decide their fate had arrived, right? As expected. The Imperial Army commander, vice commander, and city guard inspector began to speak. It was still the same speech as before, telling the soldiers that Commander Styx had already been killed by the Kenshin. Now, the 20,000 elite soldiers and close to 200 God King experts had already surrendered to the Kenshin. These 30,000 soldiers had to surrender to the Kenshin and swear their loyalty. Otherwise, they would be executed on the spot. Not to mention that the threat of death made the soldiers fearful and choose to surrender without hesitation. Their immediate superior, the numerous generals and city guard supervisor, had already surrendered to the Kenshin. What reason did they have to defend Yuta city? Commander Styx had already died, and their generals had also betrayed and surrendered. What loyalty did they have to talk about? The outcome was destined. The 30,000 soldiers didn't hesitate and immediately expressed their willingness to surrender. Therefore, Ji Tianqing appeared at the most appropriate time. With a dignified expression, he stepped across the sky and arrived above the plaza in the middle of the city. The 30,000 soldiers guarding the city had never seen Kenshin's true appearance, but they were well aware of Kenshin's powerful means. They were all fearful and uneasy. Ji Tianqing didn't waste time talking nonsense with the city guards. He waved his hand and projected a light screen, displaying a simplified version of the Pledge of Surrender. The 18 domain lords also had to bring their soldiers back to their respective domain lord manors to maintain order in their territories and calm the chaos. After all, in the past half a month, the 18 domains had been in chaos and chaos. The most important thing now was to restore peace to Reincarnation Island. The Third Order was one of the objectives of Ji Tianqing's attack on Reincarnation Island. This order was also given to the 18 domain lords. After they returned to their respective territories and calmed the chaos, they had to restore the freedom of the people as quickly as possible. The slavery system that had been practiced on Reincarnation Island for thousands of years was officially abolished. Whether it was the god race or the other races, they would regain their freedom from now on. They would no longer be slaves to the god of the underworld. In addition, all the statues of the god of the underworld, Mingi, and the Blood Hell Marshal on Reincarnation Island had to be destroyed as soon as possible. After announcing these three major events, Ji Tianqing issued a series of orders to deal with all the small matters in an orderly manner. This included the 4 ancient clans that had been loyal to Commander Mingi and had only surrendered 2 days ago. They had also received appropriate arrangements. Ji Tianqing didn't punish them, but he didn't reward them either. For the 4 ancient clans, it was already a blessing that they could keep their lives and their eternal legacy. As Ji Tianqing announced the various orders, the domain lords, generals, and god kings that were named bowed and accepted the orders. At this point, the Pine Crane clan, Hidden Dragon clan, Kuei clan, Fong clan, and Quicksand clan all felt somewhat disappointed and regretful. They finally understood that Kenshin didn't intend to choose a new domain lord. Instead, he would continue to appoint the 18 domain lords. After all, the 18 domain lords had already sworn their loyalty. As long as they didn't want to die, they wouldn't betray Kenshin. As for the 5 ancient clans, they had risked their lives to fight for the position of domain lord. At this moment, Ji Tianqing announced one last thing. That was, the first 5 ancient clans to join the anti-rebel alliance would be rewarded based on their contributions. He took out the resources and treasures that he had prepared long ago. They were worth nearly 100 trillion gold coins and used them to reward the 5 ancient clans. The people of the 5 ancient clans were instantly stunned by the huge surprise. Translator, Timothy_editor, Globeglotter. Chapter 4261. The 5 ancient clans were a little disappointed just now. Now that they knew that Ji Tianqing had taken out 100 trillion worth of resources and treasures to reward them, they were extremely excited. Even if it was evenly distributed, each ancient clan would be able to get 20 trillion worth of cultivation resources. This number was already comparable to the value of each ancient clan's treasure vault. With this reward, their assets and wealth would double, and their strength and foundation would be even more abundant. Moreover, after this huge surprise, Ji Tianqing added another reward. That was, he would take out 20 more divine abilities and secret techniques to reward the 5 ancient clans. Hearing this news, the 5 ancient clans were even more excited. They knew that the divine abilities and secret techniques that Kenshin took out were definitely high-end and precious divine abilities. They either had miraculous effects or were extremely powerful. If an ordinary person could obtain 1 or 2 of them, it would already be a great harvest. If each ancient clan could obtain 20 divine abilities and secret techniques, their power would definitely grow even stronger. In the future, these 5 ancient clans would definitely be the strongest on Reincarnation Island. No one would be able to compete with them. Ji Tianqing took out 10 interspatial rings and gave them to the 5 patriarchs of the ancient clans. Each clan received 2 interspatial rings that contained different amounts of cultivation resources and treasures. There were also jade slips that recorded the 20 divine abilities. Since it was a reward based on merit, the resources and wealth that each clan received were different. The Feng clan and the Quicksand clan received the least rewards. They only received 15 trillion worth of cultivation resources. The clan that received the most rewards was undoubtedly the Pine Crane clan. The cultivation resources they received were worth 30 trillion. As for the Hidden Dragon clan and the Kuei clan, they were in the middle. They received 20 trillion worth of resources. Of course, Ji Tianqing's additional 20 divine abilities and secret techniques were the same for all 5 ancient clans. There was no difference in this. The value of these 20 divine abilities and secret techniques was immeasurable. There was no need to give a corresponding value. The 5 ancient clan leaders received their rewards happily. They bowed again and again to express their gratitude to Ji Tianqing. The other god kings, generals, and domain lords in the hall were filled with envy and jealousy when they saw the 5 ancient clans receive such great rewards. Finally, Ji Tianqing announced the most important task, which could be considered a reward for the 5 ancient clans. That was, the Pine Crane clan would act as the vice alliance leader of the Rebel Alliance's Reincarnation Island branch. When he wasn't on Reincarnation Island, he would have full authority to handle all matters on Reincarnation Island. The other 4 ancient clans would form a monitoring group to assist the Pine Crane clan in managing the Reincarnation Island and supervising the Pine Crane clan. This way, when Ji Tianqing wasn't on Reincarnation Island, the 5 ancient clans would be the ones in control. Among the 5 clans, the Pine Crane clan was the most respected. Of course, in order to ensure that the Pine Crane race did not become too powerful, the other 4 ancient clans had the responsibility to supervise them. The domain lords of the 18 domains were also qualified to send jade slips to Ji Tianqing to report matters directly. When Ji Tianqing announced this task, the hall was in an uproar. Countless people cried out in surprise, revealing excited and envious expressions. This was especially so for the people of the 5 ancient clans. Their hearts raced, and their blood boiled. Many people were so excited that they danced with joy. Compared to the 100 trillion cultivation resources, this reward was obviously more shocking. It made the 5 ancient clans excited and exhilarated. After a while, everyone gradually calmed down. The patriarchs of the 5 ancient clans hurriedly kowtowed to Ji Tianqing to express their obedience and gratitude. The meeting ended just like that. The god kings, generals, and domain lords all bowed and left the hall. Next, Ji Tianqing oversaw Yuda's city and stayed in the Netherworld Divine Palace, waiting for the situation on Reincarnation Island to settle down. As for the generals, domain lords, and god kings, they would return to their respective territories and rush to their respective posts to carry out their missions. Of course, before the 18 domain lords left, they met Ji Tianqing again to ask him how to open the seal formation of the domain lord manor. After all, the domain lord manors of the 18 domains had been cleared out by the rebel alliance and sealed with a formation. The domain lords had different thoughts about the seal formation set up by Ji Tianqing. Only a small number of them hoped that Kenshin could remove the seal formation and allow them to enter and leave freely. However, most of the domain lords did not think so. Instead, they felt that keeping the seal formation would give their domain lord manor an additional layer of protection, and they would feel more at ease. After all, the seal formation set up by Kenshin was very close to a supreme-grade king-level divine formation. It was stronger than the original defensive formation of the domain lord manor. As long as Kenshin told them how to open the formation, they could still enter and leave without much impact. After all, they had already made the heavenly oath and pledged their loyalty to Kenshin. They would not have any other thoughts. The final result was in line with most of the domain lords' expectations. Ji Tianqing did not intend to remove the seal formation of the various domain lord manors. He only told the domain lords how to open the formation. After all, he did not want to waste any more time to remove the formations one by one. When the region masters received the method to activate the great formation, they left Yudu with hearts full of joy. They brought the soldiers under their command back to their own territories. One day later, Kenshin officially announced that he had taken over the entire Reincarnation Island. The news quickly spread throughout the entire Reincarnation Island, and countless forces and empires learned about it. In just a few days, the news spread throughout the Reincarnation Island, and hundreds of millions of people learned about the good news. Instantly, the entire Reincarnation Island fell into great shock and joy. Although many experts and forces were mentally prepared, they knew that Commander Mingi was defeated and that Kenshin was destined to take over the Reincarnation Island. However, no one expected that this day would come so quickly. Moreover, the process was very simple, easy, and smooth. There was no large-scale battle that affected the entire Reincarnation Island. It seemed that the battle was limited to Yuda's city and ended quickly. From this, it could be seen that the rebel alliance led by Kenshin would be crushed easily by the soldiers under Commander Mingi's command. No one knew that the two armies did not actually fight at all. Kenshin only assassinated Commander Mingi and then gradually took over Yuda's city. The process was easier, smoother, and faster than the people had imagined. However, no matter what, hundreds of millions of people were still jubilant and excited. They discussed this matter excitedly and cheered for Kenshin. After all, after the 18 domain lords returned to their respective territories, they quickly began to implement the new policies. The first order they carried out was to abolish slavery and restore freedom to all the people. This was the magnificent feat that hundreds of millions of people looked forward to the most. You're tuning into the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.